Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today's conversation is about one of the most important questions we can ask ourselves. What do you truly desire? Not what have you been told you should want, not what looks like success from the outside, but what your heart is genuinely calling you toward. My guest today is John Klug, also known as Jonathon 456, spiritual teacher, intuitive guide, and one of the contributing authors in our upcoming book, The Way of the Initiate, Stories of Remembering, Awakening, and Becoming the New Human. For more than 35 years, John has helped people understand the relationship between beliefs, desire, purpose, and the reality they create. In today's conversation, we're exploring the power of heart centered living, how our inner blueprint shapes our outer world, the beliefs that keep us stuck, and what it really takes to align with the life we're here to live. John, welcome to High on Life.
Well, thank you, Melissa. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited to have this conversation
Yes.
because, a heart centered living, it is something that I think we hear a lot about, but maybe
Mhm.
not a lot of people really truly understand.
No, no,
Yeah.
that is my experience. They don't truly understand what that means.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's one of those things where it's like it sounds really great and it
Yeah,
sounds like this thing that we all want to have.
right. How do I make
But
that happen? Right.
yeah, but how do I make that happen? So let's start
Mhm.
with how did you make that happen?
Well, I didn't know about it myself for quite a while. I had done some very intense trainings when I was in my early 20s, and I thought this was my magic ticket. They gave me the secrets to life, but they didn't tell me that, one of the secrets was living my heart's desire. So I didn't find that out until actually many years later when I began channeling Jonathan. And that was one of the themes that he constantly talks about. So that's how I learned it. And I have been doing that. And I notice that I get into trouble if I kind of veer off that path because what I found is that the universe really supports you in living your heart's desire because that's the reason
Hmm.
that you came here. And it is like the compass for your life. And it is also like the direct communication to your greater self that exists outside the physical. So,
Okay, well, let's start first with Jonathan. Who's
yes.
Jonathan? And what does
Well,
that mean?
yeah, it's a good question. So, Jonathan, I think of as my higher self, and that's just really a simple way of saying the who I am beyond just this physical incarnation, right? My
Hmm.
understanding is that who we are exists in the non-physical, for lack of a better word, right? We're all here on Earth, and so we have
Hmm.
this limited vocabulary, but you are a being without end, right? And so, where would that being without end exist if your body here on earth ends, right? And so, if you can think about who you are from a higher perspective, that higher perspective has lived all the lives that you have lived, are living, and just to be a little controversial, all the lives that you will live as well, right? And not only on earth, but you have incarnations in other realms, which is kind of hard to say. They can be physical realms, non-physical realms. They're definitely not Earth. You've had lots of experiences. And so your higher self um, uh, is all of those experiences wrapped up into one. Everyone has this higher self aspect, right? And, the thing that I've learned over the years is that I'm able to tap into that higher self perspective of myself and have my higher self speak directly to other people. And
Hmm.
what's nice about that is that my higher self has a much larger perspective than I do. Not only that, but my higher self is much more in tune with, the subtle energies than I am. So,
Yeah.
uh, Jonathan can speak about things that I would have no clue about just because I'm not tuned into them as a personality, right?
Yeah.
So that's what makes
I
it
I
powerful.
love this how you have explained the higher self is probably
Yeah.
one of the most grounded ways that I have ever heard anybody explain it. Because so many times it can seem like very much out there or like
Oh, yeah.
what is that, in the especially in the spiritual world, but we're talking to a group of people here on High on Life that maybe like not necessarily really in that world yet or just stepping in, and so it's really beautiful to hear such a grounded way of understanding this greater portion of us, the part of us that we are the personality here, and all of these other lifetimes and experiences and things that we've had are all coalesced into this higher self. And so how did you end up becoming, because you said I channel your higher
Yeah,
self. How
yeah.
what happened? Where when did that happen? How did you discover that? Like, for someone out there that's like, that sounds all great and stuff, but what the heck? How do I get there?
It's yeah, it's funny because it seems fantastic in a way, right? Just to talk about it. But for me, it was a very organic process. I was telling you at the beginning that I had this awakening experience, and this is what I'll write about in my chapter in the book, right? And in that awakening experience, I started to look at aspects of life that I had been shielded from because of, my very strict religious upbringing and so on. And after that awakening experience, I just bought every book that I could get my hands on that had to do with anything alternative, new age, spiritual, old spiritual stuff, new spiritual stuff, everything. But I finally came across this book written by a woman named Sanea Roman, and the book was called Opening to Channel. And I read that book, and it really made a lot of sense to me. I can also say that it didn't make sense to me as well, because their system, the one that Sanea describes, isn't exactly the system that I used. But it turned me on to a teacher that had been trained by Sanea Roman. And in that classes that I took with her, beginning and in advance, I learned that this is just a natural talent that I have. And really, what it comes down to, it's just a focus of awareness. Everyone is connected to their higher self, but in our culture, we're pretty much trained to, be outside, right? We're perceiving what our five senses are telling us. And this focus of attention is internal, it's inside, right? And so once I learned that this was something that I could do based on, Sine Roman's book, then I just began to develop it. And Jonathan didn't show up until years later, really, because I had been going through, a learning process, right? Initially, I was channeling entities that people have heard of, like Bartholomew was one, like Saint Bartholomew. There was also an entity named Clark that I had learned about from another person that I went to for a channeled session from her. And Clark introduced himself, and after our session, he said, John, I would be proud if you would bring us through and channel us. And Clark was a very interesting character. But over time, what it morphed into was this understanding that everything that I have access to comes from within, right? And so Jonathan comes from within, and Jonathan seems to me to be the most authentic expression of spirituality because Jonathan has access to all those aspects of creation, right? To the extent that he's able, right? He's
Yeah.
a sixth dimensional, which I believe most people, higher self, are sixth dimensional beings. That's where they're rooted anyway. And just think of what a sixth dimensional being would have access to. I don't really know what it is, but he brings some things through that just blow me away from time to time.
I love it. Wow, that's really powerful. And so this the thing you were saying is that this started because of the story you're sharing in the book about your
Yeah,
awakening.
my
Was
awakening.
there a what I call the an initiation or a trigger that started
Yes.
this awakening?
Yes, indeed. It's funny because I'll relate it and it might not really mean anything, but it was the most significant event that had ever happened to me. And even now, it's incredibly significant event. So I had done the S training, which was Werner Erhard and the Erhard Seminars training. That's what S was standing for at that time. And it's 2 weekends in a row in a hotel ballroom outside of Chicago is where I took it. And on the second Sunday, this is the last day of the training. It's 2 weekends in a row, Saturday, Sunday, Saturday, Sunday, at 6 p.m. The trainer who had been working with us the entire time said something to us. Basically, the trainer said, "You are a machine." And because all of the things, this makes me emotional, all the things that we had encountered, experienced up to that point, telling us that we are a machine was so significant because in that moment, the little voice inside my head stopped. right? Not everybody has a little voice, I understand, but a lot of people have this voice that's very critical, right?
Mhm.
It stopped, and it stopped for a long time. And I had never experienced that before. And then I realized that in that moment, I had a choice. I could either react the way that I'd always been reacting in life, right? Or I could choose how I would proceed from whatever incident, right? It could be very triggering. And yet I had now the ability to stop and say, well, do I want to react like I would normally react? Or am I going to come back with something different?
Mm,
So that was the awakening moment for me.
mm.
Yeah, I realized I had a choice.
Yeah, we all have
Yeah,
a choice. And so that choice led you into
yeah.
your
It,
heart's desire,
it
right?
did because I started to think about, okay, well, obviously the world is demanding all sorts of things from me. I had a small child at the time. I needed to earn a living. I needed to, somehow make my parents happy with me. Lots of different things, right? And I just had this nagging feeling inside that is not where it's at. That's just not it. And I started to think, well, I really am interested in these things that I've been learning from the people that I took this training with. And so that's how I started to read. I started to read about neurolinguistic programming, and that really opened me up. And then I started to read the Seth material by Jane Roberts, and that really opened me up. And then, they had put together a book, Jane Roberts and Seth, called The Nature of Personal Reality, which was almost like the S training, except much more detailed, right? And
Hmm.
so then, as I began to read these things and I started to understand what the nature of reality is, I realized that living my life for other people, for my parents' approval, for my boss's approval, to earn a living in the traditional sense, these were all artificial, and they weren't necessarily what was important for me in this life. Like, why did I come here? What did I come here to do? And then after a while, that led to understanding that my heart is telling me what it is that I came here to do. It tells me over and over and over again. And not only that, but it has been telling me the same message. And the only difference between now and when I was a little boy is that I understand things through an adult's perspective, but it's the same message. It's
Mm.
the message as I remember being a 5-year-old. The message was the same then, but it was a message that a 5-year-old could understand. Yeah.
So do you think everybody's always receiving the same message throughout their lives and just not understanding it?
Yeah, I think part of the stress that people feel in their lives is that they feel like there's something missing. And they don't even really understand what it is that is not right about their life. And they feel like they're doing everything that they're supposed to be doing. They're doing it the right way, right? The way that they've been taught, the way society instructs them, what they see in the news, what they see on the internet. They think they're doing it the right way. And yet something's not sitting right, right?
Hmm.
And from my experience, and I've worked literally with thousands of people, right? They all have this need to express their heart's desire and live by, a very pure interpretation of their heart's desire.
Mm. Yeah, I think that we've been I say that literally one of the opening lines of my book is we've been given a set of rules by society that no one can
No,
actually conform to. It's
no,
it's bullshit. It's the BS. We've been given this set of rules by society, and there's nothing that we can do to actually live into all those things if you were to look at all the things. So this is the only way is
yeah,
to follow your heart's desire,
yeah,
was
that's the
what
only
what
way.
you're saying. So how
Yeah.
do you define heart's desire?
I was going to just say quickly that, it
Yeah,
is a tragedy
please.
because a lot of people live their entire lives with never opening up to their heart's desire and begin to live that. So,
It is a
what
tragedy.
Jonathan tells people in terms of finding their heart's desire is what brings you joy. Look back throughout your entire life, and it doesn't matter how old you are, what brought you joy, right? If this was a child, there are certain things that bring a child joy, right? They like to play with their friends. but they like to play in a certain way, or they like to play with their toys, but they like a certain kind of toy. Uh, what people begin to realize is that when they look back in their life, there are things that brought them joy, but also things that they preferred, right?
Hmm.
Jonathan uses this example of you go into a bakery, right? And in the bakery, the display case has six different kinds of cookie. Well, what cookie do you get, right? I mean, not everybody gets a chocolate chip cookie. That's why
Hmm.
there's so many different kinds of cookies, right? Because everybody has a different set of preferences. But your preferences are, in fact, like breadcrumbs in a way that tell you or lead you to what it is that your heart's desire is. And so, as you begin to look at your preferences and you begin to look at what brings you joy, and you start to really consider these ideas, like, what does that mean for me to actually do this, to pursue this, to explore this more deeply, right? This is where you begin to find your heart's desire, right? Because it's going to tell you exactly what that is. Because you'll bring up some idea in your head and you go, well, uh, you know, how does that fit with my heart? Does it fit well? Am I excited? Is it bringing me joy? Can I feel some sense of anticipation? Or is it, more the same dull, obligation sort of driven criteria, right? And so that's how you begin to discover it. It's actually quite simple.
And so for what for someone would you say that says, okay, I hear you, John,
Uh,
follow your joy, but yeah, I have to have obligations.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because people have created all of their obligations in life, right? Now, there are other aspects to this. I don't want to make it seem like it's so simple. Like if you were to explore Vedic astrology, for example, a form of astrology, you would find that there are planetary influences, right, that impact your personality. And but what you'll find if you go even deeper is that those are a framework through which your heart's desire is best expressed. Like to tell you something personal about myself, I'm not good with partnerships, right? If I were to go into business with someone as a partnership, that would be very difficult for me because my heart's desire is to explore whatever idea it is on my own to the greatest extent that I'm able to do that, right? And so, yeah, people have what they have in life because it's based on the beliefs that they hold, which come from, a very early part in their life. They have these obligations because they've basically agreed to the rules, so to speak, of this reality. And yet, at the same time, they weren't shown that there are other ways to look at this. They didn't realize that they had other choices in this moment or
Mhm.
in the moment where they made the choice. And a lot of times there's a fear there where, well, I can't step out of what I do because what I do, keeps me safe, right? It feeds me, it houses me, it clothes me. It keeps people from getting reactive in my life, however you want to think about this, right? And so there's fear there in terms of actually considering alternatives. And fear is, a very powerful motivator, obviously.
Yeah.
So,
So, how does someone tell the difference between, say, this is my heart's desire and this is just ego, right? I have so
oh
many,
yeah.
I know a lot of people that are like, oh, well, it's really my heart's desire to have $1 million and have all this money, right? Is it really though, or
Mm.
is that the ego?
Well, yeah. I mean, I've never encountered anyone whose heart's desire was to have $1 million, right? Because these are artifacts of our world. They're not about what it is that you would engage in terms of how you step forward into the world, how you engage with the world, what it is that you bring to a situation, and what you learn from it. So, ego, the way that Jonathan talks about ego is that originally ego was designed to keep you safe. Ego was there so that when you stepped up to the edge of a cliff and you got a feeling inside your body that said, oh, you get that feeling when you're looking at something that could potentially end your life, the ego interprets that signal because what does it mean, right? It's just a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Without an ego, you would just step off that cliff because it didn't mean anything. It wasn't interpreted by anything with intelligence, right? And the ego
Mm-hmm.
works in the physical world. It doesn't work with the spiritual world. The ego works with what your senses are telling you, right? What your logical mind is producing. And if you can look at it from the perspective of, well, is this about survival, this thing that I'm doing? Is this about aggrandizing myself? Is this about controlling others, right? Having more power? If you answer any of those questions right, you're pretty much guaranteed that you're not following your heart's desire. Your heart's desire is always going to reflect a joy that you experience in life. And it's funny because not everybody really understands others' pursuit of joy because you look at, for example, a country like India, where there is just pervasive poverty, right? And people live very difficult lives. Why would anyone choose to be born into an environment like that when you come from a Western civilization, right? But you have no clue what a soul or a higher self is looking at in terms of a criteria, right?
Well,
What would
and
bring you joy?
I
Mhm.
100% agree with you on this. I went to India in 2017 and it changed my life
Yeah,
because I became back a minimalist. I
yeah.
literally went, I was speaking at the Women's Economic Forum, and when I would be there in New Delhi, it was like, women in golden saris and all the money in the world and all these things. And then you'd walk out these doors and it was like the biggest dichotomy you ever saw. And I went into
Oh,
some of the places in different parts of the country, and the children living under sticks had nothing, but they were some of the happiest children I had ever seen, ever, and then I could see the murmuration of how society moved together and the beingness that existed there. And in many ways, they're living a lot better than we are in the Western
oh yeah,
world, right? And so it's
yeah.
fascinating to see, like, where, what are the, as a soul, what lessons we came to learn, what parts of the world we chose to incarnate into see. Because here in the Western world, it is very much an ego driven, more money, more success, the stress of life, like, people, I say first world problems, right?
Right.
If somebody has a first world problem, they're complaining about something that I'm like, really, we're like, we look at it, but in our world, that to us, that's true.
Yeah, they lack perspective, right? They've never
Yep.
been in a situation where they could experience the extremes, so to speak, or even, a very different perspective from the one that they possess in the moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's difficult for people to really understand what it is that they could do because, like you're saying, you had this eye-opening experience in India. For the most part, people don't have eye-opening experiences, and it's set up that way because this is what the ego is looking to do. It's looking to preserve its control, right? It's looking to preserve, the status quo and to not rock the boat and so on and so forth. And so you can live your life, I wouldn't say successfully, but the entirety of it without really examining the possibilities and without looking at your heart's desire. And you might not be very happy as a result of that. Not
Yeah.
saying that living your heart's desire will always make you happy, but there'll be a certain groundedness and connectedness to your life
Mhm.
and a place that you can always go back to knowing that you know, this is me, this is my safe place, right?
Yeah. So where do you think or believe that our heart's desires come from? Are they random, or are they
Mm-mm.
pointing us towards something important, or what's that? What's that?
Right.
Yeah.
So the way Jonathan talks about it is that your heart's desire represents the purpose that you came into this life to experience or to have, to work through, so to speak. And so it is specifically for this life that you're living. Your heart's desire is a communication path, we could say, from your normal, regular waking self to your higher self, to the aspect of you that exists outside the physical. That's what your heart does. It serves as a communication path. And this desire that you have that emanates from the heart is all about this incarnation, what it
Mm,
is that you came here to do, what it was that your hopes and desires and aspirations and experiments that you wanted to try in this life, that's where it all comes from. and you had put all that together before you incarnated. And
Mhm.
so now you have this communication channel that, uh, with high fidelity, can go back to what it is that you came here for, why you came here, and the most direct path that you could follow that will, bring you joy, bring you a sense of purpose, bring you a focus, and let go of all the things that, don't bring you uh, like a sense of satisfaction. And a lot of that is, what we have come to learn just through our culture and the way that our society works.
So does it ever change over time or shift or make different ways or forms?
It doesn't. It
Okay.
doesn't. That's the thing that's funny about it, is that you actually live for a very short time, if you think about it, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we're only on the planet for 70, 80 years, sometimes more, sometimes much less, right? But in any of those incarnations, our heart's desire is there. And it is broadcasting what it is that uh, it's basically broadcasting a reminder or a beacon home, maybe you could say. And um, sometimes heart's desires are so complex that it would take you more than one lifetime to fulfill that heart's desire. What you actually end up doing, and this is perfectly in alignment with your heart's desire, is that you've opened it up and you've been exploring it and you've been really living your heart's desire, right? Maybe you don't go through every aspect or permutation of what your heart's desire means, but the heart's desire remains constant from when you're born and throughout your entire life.
Mhm. Awesome. So you've
Yeah.
been doing this work for 35 years now, right?
Yeah.
Long time.
Long time.
What is the biggest misconception people have about beliefs and manifestation?
Uh, hmm. Well, um, a lot of people have the thought that their belief is important, right?
Mhm.
And right, and they got their beliefs from people that they admire or that they've been taught to fear, for example. And I have to be careful here because we could get into areas that are quite controversial. But you look at religion, for example, and
Mhm.
I grew up in a very strict religious environment. My father's very strict Catholic, and the beliefs that he fostered in us was, if you sin and you don't seek forgiveness, then you're going to hell, right? That's all there is to it. And you'll be there as a being for eternity, burning in hell, right? So that's quite a motivator. I mean, this is what people use to motivate themselves. And yet, beliefs aren't anything more than a solidified habit of thinking, right? And once you've had a habit of thinking, you begin to forget about it. And when you forget about it, that becomes a belief for you. You are unaware of all the beliefs that you hold because you've stopped thinking about what it is that those beliefs are made of.
Mhm.
And yet the beliefs are what create your reality, right? It's
Yeah.
like the universe is trying to figure out, how does it work with you? How does it give you what you want? And the biggest signal that the universe gets from you is, what are your beliefs? And the universe, if like you were to think of a universe having a personality, it would say, oh, well, this is what this person believes in. I'm going to give them that. And I'm going to give them more of that because this is what they think about all the time. Like attracts like, right? You think about something, it becomes a belief, and this is what you use to manifest your life, your beliefs. And so the best way that you could live, maybe optimal, efficient, however you want to classify it, is to always be in a position where you're examining your beliefs and you're asking to be shown beliefs that you've forgotten about so that you can evaluate them and discard them if they don't fit anymore. So that what you can do is you can continually recreate beliefs that then the universe automatically uses to create the reality that you experience.
And is there ways to create beliefs around your heart's desires that will then allow you to
Mm.
bring those, shape your reality with those experiences?
Yeah, and it's really quite the ordinary process, right? So once you begin to understand what it is that your heart's desire is, what brings you joy, what brings you a sense of purpose, so on and so forth, and you begin to act on that, right? And then you begin to see uh, what the outcome is, how that fits with you. Does it fit well? Do you get a sense of accomplishment, purpose, joy from that, right? And as you begin to repeat that, right, it becomes a belief and it becomes a part of the fabric of who you are. And as that becomes a part of who you are, then the universe continues to give you what it is that is, your beliefs and your habitual thoughts.
Do you have, yeah, do you have a story of someone who's transformed their life following this, their heart's strongest desire and changing their beliefs and creating this?
Yeah. I have to be careful not to make it too personal, right?
Hmm.
But there was someone that I've worked with several times throughout the years, and it's kind of an ideal relationship because, from my perspective, you don't want a client that's going to come to you every other week to help you through life, right? To hold their hand and
Hmm.
give them advice on a moment by moment basis. What you're really looking for is someone who can take an idea and run with it. And so, this person that I'm thinking about in particular, we started out working with, the basic everyday concerns and then some issues that were really tripping them up. And so, as they actually began to apply these ideas, which were, um, uh, thinking about including, I guess, maybe it's a better way of saying it, what it is that they really desired in life, and they began to follow it like they basically made it an exercise for themselves. What happened is that they became much more successful at what they chose to do for their career. Not only that, but they found a person that they then eventually married. All of the things that made their life difficult, all these patterns that they possessed, that they were able to examine, they were able to release them and were no longer held back by them. And so this person now is a very, she lives in a state of joy, I would say, because now she's looking at what it is that she wants to bring forward in her life. And these are all based on her heart's desire about having a family, right? About having a community, about a way of living, and so on and so forth, that she never would have considered because that's not where her head was at the time. Her head was at, what is society demanding of me? What is my family demanding of me? So on and so forth. And now she was able to let go of all of that and actually begin to put in place the things that bring her joy.
Hmm. So you're saying things like the family and the community, and those all sound like different desires. And so is that
Yeah.
all like, pieces of the same desire, or is it just parts of it, or how does that? Because you said we only have one desire, right? Like one
Yeah, yeah.
heart's desire.
One
So
heart's
is
desire.
that like a big over, like I don't know, the helicopter view of the desire, and then it comes down into all these little pieces? Is that kind of how it works?
Well, the first thing that occurred to me as you were speaking is that, a lot of the things that are required of us by society, by family, and such are
Mm-hmm.
really the parameters of our life in which we find our heart's desire, how we find the joy in living, right? Those parameters shape our choices, what we can and can't do, the way that we can express ourselves, and so on and
Yeah.
so forth, right? And so they're not part of your heart's desire. They're a part of the circumstances that you chose for the incarnation, and they become then a permanent aspect of it, right? I think about the way that my father was. I mentioned this before about he was very strictly religious, but that was important for me because I had a contrast that I could work with, right? I
Yeah.
could see very clearly once I, had my awakening moment that there was something to push against because the thing that, my father was promoting was something that it didn't make me happy, right? In fact, it made me quite I don't know what, despondent from time to time, right? And so eh, the circumstances that you find yourself in life really have nothing to do with your desires other than from the
Mm.
perspective of thinking that the circumstances of your life are supporting you in the choices that you get to make within the confines of what you find in your life, right? And that helps you to direct the expression of your heart's desire, but your heart's desire stayed the same throughout. And
Got it.
even if you
Yeah.
find yourself like I did, where, I basically let go of religion, let go of my concern about my parents' thoughts about me and all of that, it was done, right? That circumstance didn't matter anymore. It didn't impact me,
Mm.
but it helped to push me in a particular direction away from,
Yeah.
right, what I was being shown. So,
Beautiful. So one of the things that you talk about is our inner blueprint.
yeah.
What is that?
Well, it's funny because, sometimes when I write, I have to use like phrases that people understand, right? You can think of a blueprint as a plan for something, right? You're going
Right.
to build a building and it shows you what's where and the measurements and, all the different elevations and things if you're building a house. Well, your inner blueprint is this heart's desire, but it's taken at a more concrete perspective, right? You've
Mm,
probably met people that from their very earliest age, they knew what they wanted to do in life. They wanted to sing. They wanted to be an actor. They wanted to be an engineer, whatever it is that they wanted to be. One of my best friends, he wanted to be a mathematician, and everything that he would ever do would be completely centered around the idea of advanced mathematics. This is what brought him joy. I don't understand it, right? But
I
this
don't.
is this is what his life was about. So I'm not sure where I was going with that, but
Yeah, so the inner blueprint is
yeah,
basically the like if I'm looking at this, I love the idea of like I have a if I'm going to build something, if I write
mhm,
I need a blueprint first, and so this is
yeah,
like the foundation this of the architecture of what I'm going to be able to build in my life. I love
yeah.
the idea of yeah.
And so my friend who had to have mathematics as the center of his life, that was the blueprint in the sense that any endeavor that he would, spend his time on was centered around math. That's the blueprint. And then
Yeah.
he did things like, he wrote software that ran advanced medical devices, and these require insanely complicated mathematical equations, right? Like how do you produce an image from an electromagnetic reflection, right? These are kinds of the things that he did, but it's all about the math background as the blueprint for what he would actually end up manifesting in his life. Because your heart's desire isn't telling you the specifics of what it is that you would manifest in your life. It's kind of giving you a general guideline. And you either
Mm,
are following the guideline or you're feeling like you're missing something or you're dissatisfied or something along those lines,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah. Makes a lot of sense, of course.
Yeah.
So if for those that are listening and maybe they realize, okay, oh, I'm not aligned to my heart's desire. I don't know what my heart's desire is. I don't even know if I can find it out. What is like? Is there a process? Is there a first step? Is there something they can do? Like
There
right
is.
now is what I can do to start to uncover that.
There is. Yeah. And this can be really difficult for, adults because they've had so many years of making habits and patterns for how to live their life that it's difficult to kind of unthink all the things that you think.
Mm,
But the best way to do that is this process of trial and error. When you think back in your life and you remember what brought you joy, the things that you like to do. Like I know one person who always loved doing arts and crafts things, right? It didn't matter what it was. When they were little, it was like paint by number, right? Or
mhm.
making clay figures. But after a while, what they realized is that this was an expression of art for them, right? And they became an artist as a result of this pursuit. But that's not how their life was pushing them, right? Life was pushing them into the typical, requirements like, getting married, getting a college education, all those different things that, we have pressures in this world. So you go back and remember a thing that brought you joy and begin to play with it. You might think it's a little silly or a little immature, but it is the start of a path. And the best way to remember that start of the path is what you remember from when you were younger and what brought you joy, what intrigued you and really hooked you in terms of your attention, and begin to experiment with that. And it's like with the artist example. There is no, I mean, there are, but there are rarely artists who are masters at the beginning, right? You look at an artist original work, and it's very childlike, right? And as they mature and develop, some of it becomes quite masterful, depending on who you're talking about. But
Mhm.
it's true for everyone. This mastery develops because you've picked a direction which is in alignment with your heart's desire, and you begin experimenting with it. As you experiment with it, it takes you down different paths. And it's important for you to just stay with those different paths until you get into like this habit of constantly checking what you're doing against how it feels against your heart's desire, right? And then eventually you will unlearn the habits and the habitual thinking that you have about your life.
And so, what happens to society and our planet when everyone starts living from their heart's desire?
Well, that's a really interesting question, isn't it? And this makes it's a difficult thing to talk about because if you think about the parameters of this world that we live in, and this is a controversial topic, but for
Yep.
example, some people believe that this world is controlled by a very few individuals. And not only that, but those individuals are controlled by, off-planet intelligences, right? And so then you think about if that's true, and then the parameters of our reality are set, other people like to think that, this is Lucifer's world, right? And it's a dark place that we're all living in. There's all of these different ideas about what it is to be alive, right? And I'm not saying that any one of them in particular is true, but with the right lens, any of this could be true, right? You could look at it and say, yeah, I can see how that works, right? So then the real question is are you someone's whose heart's desire is to bring massive change to the world? Or is your heart's desire about what it is that you can experiment with, explore on yourself, in yourself, through yourself, without, a huge impact on the rest of the world?
Right.
Right? And so then you start to think about this. And if our reality has certain parameters to it, and your heart's desire is all about blowing out, blowing away, those restrictions, then it becomes an interesting path in life, right? Um, I
Yeah.
wouldn't say that most people are, what do they call that? Like paradigm busters, right? Most people are looking at something at a more personal level, but there are those who are looking at their community, and that is their heart's desire. And if they were actually to live their heart's desire and bring it to fruition, and they found themselves at odds with the parameters of our existence, well, you can imagine that it would be a very interesting life. I won't go into all the different
It's a
details, but
very interesting life. I'm a
mhm,
paradigm buster for sure. So,
yeah.
I'm
And
excited
so,
to see what's happening, right? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so it could be a difficult life, but it could
Oh,
be,
it's not
yeah,
easy,
no, but
but
at
it's
the same
beautiful.
time, it's beautiful. Yeah. And it brings you joy doing what you do. And
Yeah.
this is the thing, it doesn't have to be something that looks right on the surface. It doesn't have to be something that checks all the boxes or,
Hmm.
gets everyone's approval or whatever, to be a paradigm buster as your heart's desire, you know, um, i- it's another valid choice, right? And there are so many choices, as many choices as there are people on the planet, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So beautiful. Well, Jonathan, what an incredible conversation today we've had about living into our heart's desire and really understanding how our beliefs shape that. And so I have one final question for you
Yeah.
today. It's the same question I ask everyone. This is the High on Life podcast, and I want to know, what does high on life mean to you?
High on life. I think what it really means for me is figuring out how to make everything work in my life on a moment to moment basis,
Mm,
right? What I find is that if life gets too easy, like for example, I've always been blessed with, making a good income throughout my entire life. But if I just kind of rest on my laurels and just, kind of sit back and do the thing that brings income and all that, I get bored and I get restless, and that's not what I want, right? And so, high on life to me is um, setting up situations in my life where I can figure out like what is the most optimal way to resolve this, right?
Mm,
How can I win at whatever situation that I find myself in? But these aren't random situations that I put myself in just for the experience of it. They all are in alignment with my heart's desire. And so, like, what brings me, what makes me high on life, so to speak, is to say, okay, well, here's an idea of how to pursue a heart's desire. Let's give this a try and
mm,
see what we need to do in order to make it work, to get it to work, or understand that there isn't a way that I personally can make it work and let it go and then try something else. So it's this constant application of my talents, right? I have a
yeah,
specific set of talents, right? How can I apply those talents to situations that I've dreamt up for myself in life
yeah.
and make it work, or discover that I can't make it work and then choose something different?
Mm, beautiful. Well said. Thank you, John.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
so
Yeah.
much. I'm so excited. So you can find all how to connect with John in the show notes below. And also you can check out The Way of the Initiate, Stories of Remembering, Awakening, and the New Human. That's thewayoftheinitiate.com and the Way of the Initiate online for our summit that is upcoming. And you can find everything in the show notes below. Thank you all so very much. Thank you, John.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye-bye.